Before I begin my sermon today, it is important that we take a moment to honor our veterans of armed service. Tomorrow is Veterans Day and the 95th anniversary of the armistice that ended the First World War. As Unitarian Universalists, we have our sights set on, in the words of our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. At the same time, we live in a world in which that goal is not yet realized. As we continue to each do our work to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, let us make time to especially honor the courage and the sacrifice of those among us who have served in the military. Please rise that we may recognize and thank you. Thank you. The words of the reading that Rodney shared with us come from the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, one of the great theologians and ministers of the 20th century. His career included serving as Dean of Chapel at Howard University and Boston University, the founding and the ministering to of San Francisco's Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples, which was the first intentionally racially and culturally integrated church in the United States. He wrote 22 books, and he was a mentor to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders. Dr. Thurman's words speak so well to that experience of seeking and finding that still, small voice, that expectant, unjudgmental openness that is the heart of spiritual practice and the foundation of self-care. But this personal, solitary stillness is only part of the equation. The validation and the true measure of self-care is how it empowers us to care for one another and to build and sustain community. There's another passage that I'll share, one that is an excerpt from one of the most performed pieces of prose in the modern era. In the event of a decompression, an oxygen mask will automatically appear in front of you. To start the flow of oxygen, pull the mask towards you. Place it firmly over your own nose and mouth, secure the elastic band behind your head, and breathe normally. Although the bag does not inflate, oxygen is flowing to the mask. If you are traveling with a child or someone who requires assistance, secure your own mask first and then assist the other person. The last part's the part that's important to me today. Even though these words of sage wisdom are set in the context of a hypothetical crisis, they are pertinent in the most mundane aspects of our day-to-day life. If your stress levels have you coming apart at the seams, or if you are so burned out by your work that you can barely get out of bed, or if you are anesthetizing all your emotions through food or sex or drugs or alcohol, you aren't going to have much time, energy, or focus to spare on the critical work that we as members of this faith community aspire to. To put it another way, if there is any part of you that seeks to help heal a broken world, you must prioritize your health and well-being, or else the broken places in our culture will suck you dry. In my reading as I prepared for this sermon, I was struck by the number of sources that treated the development of self-care practices exclusively as an antidote for that constellation of emotional, mental, and spiritual ills that we wrap up together and call burnout. This probably has something to do with serving as a minister in a hospital setting, as one's filters are always working, even if one doesn't notice it at the time. It's true that, especially for healthcare professionals, burnout is a special danger. But good self-care is, I believe, important on its own terms, and not just as an intervention or preventative medicine. It's an important factor in being of service and also in living a meaningful, satisfying, and happy life. Moreover, good self-care helps us to develop resilience, the capacity to not be dismantled and undone by life's twists and turns. It's also important to recognize that we are profoundly privileged to even be engaging in this line of inquiry, asking the question of how to care for oneself so as to better care for others puts us at least on the third tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is a question of love and belonging, esteem and self-actualization. There are many people in this world, in the United States of America, in the state of California, and in Contra Costa County, who this minute are concerned with their own safety and security and the most basic physiological needs of breathing, food, water, sleep, and excretion. I'll share one example just to underscore the privilege inherent in this sermon, which is that should any of us here find ourselves needing to use the restroom, we have multiple options just within a 200-foot radius of this sanctuary. This is a luxury that is not shared by homeless people in San Francisco, where public restrooms have been systematically closed all over town. So there is a spiritual practice takeaway that I invite you to engage in the next time you go to the bathroom. Just take a moment to consider what it would be like to have to resist nature's call until it became so insistent that you were forced to surrender your dignity and do your business in an open public place. Part of self-care is humility, honoring the true blessings and challenges of one's own position. So, there are some ways in which we may not even need to think about fastening the oxygen mask to our faces. But it is also important to reflect on the responsibility that comes with privilege, or as I like to call it, Peter Parker's first law. With great power comes great responsibility. Any Spider-Man fans out there? How can we follow the guidance of body, mind, and heart so that we can be in as good a spot as possible? The fundamental distinction that I hope you take away from my words here today are that, well, not one fundamental, but if there is one, hopefully it's this. Self-care is fundamentally distinct from self-indulgence. I've noticed a tendency to conflate the two, and it's one that is dangerous to me. I'll share an example from my own experience as a student chaplain. One of my colleagues, who I'll call Roger, would practice self-care in the following way. After some of his on-call shifts as a resident in the San Francisco hospital where we worked, he would call in sick, order a large Pizza Hut pizza, and eat the entire thing over a 12-hour period while watching cable TV. This is not the kind of practice that enables one to confront and work with the stresses of healthcare, and indeed, Roger did not continue in the chaplaincy or even in ministry. I'll note here that I don't want to sound like a scold or a Puritan or a hypocrite. I don't believe that pleasure is sinful or inherently dangerous. Conversely, I am a big fan of pleasure and have rarely turned down a slice of pizza when it's offered. Sometimes even when it's not. But I am also a person who has lived experience of the dangers that people with certain personality types and biochemical makeup can run into in pursuit of pleasure. These dangers are steps up the pyramid of idolatry and addiction, at the peak of which is the place where pursuit of the high becomes more important than life itself. Self-indulgence masquerades as self-care because it provides short-term satisfaction, relief, and pleasure. But ultimately, it leaves us empty and ill-equipped to address actual challenges and experiences of deeper pain, of the work to which we aspire. It's the equivalent of putting a Band-Aid on a cancerous mole. Actual self-care, I've found, provides more of a sense of meaning or satisfaction than of short-term happiness, and it tends to be more of a challenge to engage in. It requires more intention, more reflection, more accountability. Paradoxically, this can be a special challenge in and of itself, the the work can be challenging, especially for the kind of person who finds themselves motivated to help others. It's very easy, especially for high-achieving types, and I've noticed that we have a few high-achieving types in this congregation. It's not escaped my attention. It can be easy for us to use overwork and ceaseless service to others as a way of avoiding our own emotional unease and suffering. Work addiction is exceedingly common in both healthcare workers and in ministers. And I'll just say that this is an area where I'm grateful for my built-in tendency towards laziness and sloth. It's something of an immunity for that pitfall. So what is it that signifies a genuine self-care practice? What is it that you can do to take care of yourself so as to better care for others? And I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out, but it's going to be different for every person. Each one of us has our own needs, our own growing edges, our own challenges, and there is no one-size-fits-all situation. However, the good news about that is that careful examination of your own life will give you many clues to follow, should you find yourself in a place of needing to care more deeply for yourself. The admittedly rather labored title for this sermon hopefully speaks to this, and it was inspired by Ginny Corder's remarks at one of our General Assemblies, where she said that she had learned everything she needed to know about being a good leader by being an excellent follower. Bless you. And so it is for us. As helpful as we can be to others, we need to be accountable to something greater, wiser, deeper, and more practiced than ourselves. Otherwise, the care that we would show to our own person is in danger of becoming untethered or subverted by pleasure-seeking and pain aversion. The good news, again, is that there are a multiplicity of guides available to us, and that our faith reminds us that while we are on this journey in company, we are not bound to all be traveling in the same manner. I'll share a few of the self-care guides that have been important to me and take this opportunity to emphasize how truly individual this process is for each person. What is good self-care for me might be poisonous for you and vice versa. This is why, ironically, it is so important that we are on this journey together. Another person often can see more clearly what is healthy and unhealthy for me than I can. The key, though, is to ask or to wait until you are asked. Nobody likes unsolicited feedback. The single most important personal guides for me as I work to care for myself as a minister have been other colleagues in ministry and in chaplaincy. In particular, the chaplaincy students that I worked with during my residency who helped me to see where I was most in need of attention and focus. I'm fortunate to have been called to a field with a higher than average number of really insightful, really kind people. And I have tried to be as shameless as possible about benefiting from the wisdom around me. I've also employed a spiritual director and a therapist, and I have been mentored by amazing ministers in both hospital and parish ministry settings, from whom I have learned tricks and tools of the trade, but more importantly, from whom I have drawn guidance and support. Equally important as a guide to me has been the community of recovery in the 12-step program to which I belong. The work of being a sober person has given me many spiritual tools on which to draw from, not the least of which has been the Serenity Prayer, which I recite to myself every time I wash my hands in the hospital. The suggestion that I was given when I started as a student is that in order to wash your hands in a sanitary fashion, you have to wet them, scrub with soap for at least 15 to 30 seconds, and the best way to gauge this length of time is to sing to yourself the happy birthday song or the alphabet song, and I knew that I would go crazy if I tried to do that. So it struck me that if I said the Serenity Prayer as I was washing my hands, and if I said it slowly and with intention, it would take about 15 seconds. And the experience of saying those words, of saying, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. That saying those words and feeling the warm water flowing over my hands would renew me. It would give me a lift that would help me set down any weight that I was carrying and give me something that I felt I could give back to my patients. I've also been blessed by the guidance of 2 different personality tests, the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory. Learning more about my Myers-Briggs type, which is ENFP for those in the know, and my Enneagram number, which is 7. That's a little cryptic. I'll say more in a second. These are ways of better understanding yourself and learning about what your natural strengths might resemble and what your challenges might be. So, for instance, I've found that it's important for me in life to seek depth, to resist the temptation to dabble in many different things and pursue my interests in a flighty way, that it's important to become more tolerant of pain and discomfort in myself and in other people, to understand that it's impossible to keep everyone happy always, to become more comfortable with power and authority, and as well as with structures, schedules, and other tasks of management. It's also important to find a passion to pursue, to find something to do to give life savor. For me, one of these things recently has been photography. I've gotten hooked on the smartphone app called Instagram, which lets you take and monkey with pictures on your cell phone to give them different depth of focus, different filters to adjust the colors. It is so much fun, and if you follow me on Facebook, I apologize for the occasional barrage of imagery that might greet you. But as the father of 2 small kids, I don't really have time for a deep passion, and so finding something that I could do just even to fill in the cracks, to exercise that creative and artistic part of myself, has been invaluable. I also, other things that feed that passion are talking about art and the meaning of art, listening to and making music, and this is a good time to recognize the amazing work of the choir today. I almost fell out of my chair listening to What Wondrous Love Is This. Thank you. And I try to read for pleasure. Again, fitting it in the cracks where I can, but something to help me remember that life is not just to be worked at, but also to be enjoyed. Last, I'll mention that family has been a huge area of self-care for me, both in terms of the joy and sense of meaning I get as a father, and also as a sense of perspective for what I experience in the hospital, that as long as I come home to my kids, nothing is too terrible, and that I do need to hold all my pieces together, otherwise the chaos could overwhelm me. It's a constant process of having rough edges sanded away and being forced towards growth. So these are some of the things that are working for me as I work to hold myself together in a demanding and occasionally traumatic ministry, and as a father and as a husband. I hope that sharing them briefly has sparked maybe a piece of recognition or evaluation in you, and that you leave here today with a notion about something you are already doing or something that you might do. Most of all, I hope that you have a notion of someone you might talk to in order to see if your own practices and patterns constitute self-care or if they could stand a little tweaking. we are all susceptible to buying our own bill of goods, and it is invaluable to check out what's going on with you with another person. I'll give a hint about someone that you might talk to about this. Of the two people in the world that I know who are best at this, one is sitting at the back of the sanctuary right now, and the other is returning from travel in a few days. Absolutely never forget what amazing resources you have for doing this work in Leslie and in David. We are privileged as members of this church to be guided by just two amazing and wonderful ministers, and it's important not to overlook that. I'll close with one of my favorite stories that I think ties together better than any words I could the connection between taking care of self and being able to take care of others. This is a story from around the same time period as the one from the Bible that Rodney shared with us at the beginning of the service. But it involves a different spiritual teacher, the Rabbi Hillel, who, while he was teaching one day in the marketplace, was interrupted by a smart aleck who said, "If you're such a hotshot teacher and such a big deal rabbi, I bet there are things that you can't do." He said, I bet that you can't, for instance, recite the whole Torah while standing on one foot. And Rabbi Hillel was no fool, so he looked at the man calmly, lifted one foot off the ground, and said in a warm voice, "Don't do to another person that which you find hateful to yourself. That is the whole of the Torah. All the rest is commentary." Please take care of yourself. If you don't, who will?